Welcome back. Today we're doing another episode on 308 and 6.5. And this is kind of a rehash, rephrase, because people seem stuck on certain things that I don't think were really addressed clearly enough, or were left out entirely because to me they're side effects, not a primary consideration between these two cartridges. New subscribers, thank you. Old subscribers, thank you. I appreciate you being here. The channel has grown tremendously in the last month. The increase in audience is nice to see. It is great to see new people here. Really looking forward to the future. Now, this all started because two different people really got into the SD, the sectional density of the rounds, and how that plays into whether 6.5 is really a good option or is simply a better or worse option than others. And then it got into power at range, different ranges, and relative performance. I decided that it clearly was worth more discussion. And the first thing I want to say is I treat SD as a side effect. I don't look at SD as a primary consideration. SD is what happens when you have a heavier bullet in a smaller caliber. That gives you a better SD because your bullet is heavier given its diameter, or relative to its diameter, not given. So a longer bullet rather than a fat, short bullet because it's all about the width versus the weight. Now, most of this tends to come back in terms of ballistic coefficient, but that's not really what they're asking about. Because you could have a skinny bullet with a good ballistic coefficient, or a fat bullet with a good ballistic coefficient in the same weight range based on design. So it gets a little fuzzy. But you also run into SD not meaning much unless you're comparing apples to apples, which is where I think this whole thing fell apart for me. I wasn't comparing apples to apples. I don't think they're equivalent rounds. To me, each of these rounds does something different, does it differently, and fills a different role. Now, it gets confusing a little bit because 308 and 6.5 get used similarly. However, 6.5 was specifically designed to do things better than 308. Certain specific things. Not everything, but certain specific criteria were said, hey, we want to do this better. How do we do that? And we're sticking to those two. Just to be clear, I mean, you could extend this discussion to an infinite number of cartridges. I wasn't going to get that far. We're trying to keep this reasonably length. So the other thing that is important is I'm comparing factory ammo. I am not getting into your pet hand load with some exotic bullet. I used two GMX bullets for this comparison. They were the two closest SD options because that was the thing people were saying is, hey, you got to compare like to like. And I disagree with that, but we're going to use that as the basis of this discussion. The 165 grain 308 round, GMX in the full bore line, so they're fairly powerful round. There is one that's more powerful. The 165 grain interlock round is actually going faster and gives more energy, but it's a different kind of round. And I wanted to compare the GMXs. I didn't want to get into multiple bullet types. The GMX is not a traditional bullet. It is the modern hunting bullet from Hornady. It is what they suggest. We're talking for whitetail hunting, medium game. In fact, they suggest the interlock for large game, if you're elk, even moose. It holds together better. GMX expands well. So, at the muzzle, you have 2,600, a little faster than that, but 2,600 feet per second, with 2,500, a little under that, but 2,500 foot-pounds of energy. Now that gives 61 as a momentum score. I don't know what units they're using, but I assume it's consistent for all of these, so forget it. I didn't bother looking. And a Taylor knockdown score, which is kind of a arbitrary math system that Taylor used for determining the appropriate round for a different large game, of 18. Now, the reason I start with that is the highest numbers in terms of energy, momentum, and knockdown score of everything else on this chart. It's the highest one. Everything else is downhill from there. At 100 yards, which we're going to use as the longest reasonably likely rifle shot, East Coast. Okay, East Coast. However, that's not the round anybody uses for 6.5 Creedmoor. The 120s are basically the redheaded stepchild of the 6.5 Creedmoor. So I went and pulled the numbers for the 140 grain ELDX bullet. Now this is the flagship hunting bullet for precision hunting bullet for Hornady. Excuse me, it's been a long day. And I apologize if my heat goes off and creaks horribly. There's a heater unit directly above the ceiling, a little out of frame. So the 140 is a .293 SD versus .246 and 248 for the GMXs. So significantly higher with 6.25 as the BC, okay, versus 450 roughly for the other two. When you have an SD that's similar, your BC tends to be similar. So significantly better in both. However, it's now going a little slower. So your energy at the muzzle is 2315, and we're gonna ignore the 120 now, and we're just gonna compare with the 308. It's comparing to 2495, so 2500 with the 308. Knockdown score of 14, momentum of 55. So the momentum is very similar to the 100-yard score of the 308. So at no point in short range does the 6.5 equal the 308. You got a bigger bullet out of the 308, it's a heavier bullet out of the 308, and it's going basically the same speed. I mean, the difference is minimal. That's a win for the 308, which is pretty much what I said in the other video. I don't know, maybe I edited it out and I forgot. At short range, the 308 wins. It is a more powerful round at short ranges. Where it fails compared to the 6.5 is when you get way out there. You know, if you're shooting longer range, the 6.5 wins. Now, here's where I get into the when is enough category. The 6.5 is enough up close. There's no question. Like, that's not even up for debate. There is nothing in North America other than maybe some brown bears up in Alaska that is not takeable with 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, at short range, the 308 maybe can do it better. But you're splitting hairs when you say better, because now you're into, well, how do you really compare that? Because terminal ballistics are not numbers on a page. What are you shooting? What's the environment? And if you get into that, I think the effective difference between these cartridges, even at short range, is minimal. So now you get into something a little different. You get into comfort. You get into what's the weight of the rifle for a given comfort level. If you have both of these in the same weight rifle, the 308 has noticeably heavier recoil. Now, for me, for the average middle-aged and younger adult male, who cares? Not enough recoil to matter, certainly, especially not on a hunting rifle where you're going to fire 1 or 2 shots at a time. We just don't care. That's not a consideration. These are not high recoil rounds, certainly nothing out of the ordinary. However, we're not the only people who hunt. Women hunt. Older people hunt. Younger people hunt. In those scenarios, a lightweight 308 hunting rifle can be rough. It sounds silly if you're an adult male in good shape, but think about your grandparent. Think about your child. If you've got a small framed female in your family, think about what that recoil is like to them. Uh, there's a huge difference between what is okay to somebody like me and what is okay to a 110 pound, 5 foot tall woman. I don't care how athletic she is. She doesn't have the bone structure. She doesn't have the mass of muscle and padding to soak that up. It is going to be painful. It is going to be jarring. It is going to be no fun. 6.5 is noticeably lighter. It is a very noticeable difference. It is one of the things they specifically sought to improve because they were using it in matches where they're firing lots of rounds and they're firing very careful shots and they need to do it relatively rapidly. Time counts. So they don't want to be dealing with a lot of recoil, messing up their next shot, messing up their ability to shoot the whole course of fire without being sore. And they're in awkward positions where recoil can be difficult to manage. You don't have an ideal body shape for it. You're, kind of at a weird angle. And, the rifle's out a little further, or it's in a little further, or it's a little higher or lower. If you get in a less than ideal position, recoil becomes harder to deal with. I certainly wouldn't want to fire like a lightweight 300 Win Mag without it really well planted on my shoulder, good body position. It's no fun. So at short range, 308 wins, no question. Particularly the interlock was significantly more powerful, not massively, but it was noticeable in the numbers. Yeah. So if you're hunting longer ranges, 6.5 wins. If you're shooting longer ranges for target, 6.5 wins. If you are trying to do holdovers and you care about those numbers, well, here's the comparison. The 165 grain GMX at 500 yards, if a 200 yard zero, is negative 54 feet. Okay, 54 inches, not feet. 54 inches. So 4.5 feet. The 120 grain 6.5 is 41 inches. The 140 grain is 44 inches. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but the next 100 yards is even more drastic, and I apologize for that. Every time you step the range out another 100 yards, once the drop starts becoming significant, it is drastic. Creedmoors win that fight. It is just that much easier to do your holdovers. It is that much smaller a loss. Now, for most people, that's irrelevant. If you don't hunt out west, you don't care, which is where I think this comes from. The thought that SD is so critical and everything else is kind of irrelevant comes from an environment where 50 yards is a normal shot, 75 yards is a normal shot, 100 is pushing it, 200 yards is almost unheard of. You go out west, 50 yards, nobody, they're like, huh? What are you talking about? That's nothing. So, different environment, different animals, different ammo. It's just like using a 30-30. Nobody uses a 30-30 for hunting deer in open terrain if they don't have to. I mean, you can, but most people don't. On the other hand, 30-30 in the East Coast areas, all day long. It's still one of the most popular cartridges out there. Kills tons of deer. Works great. So short range, great. 308, short to medium range, great. You start pushing it, 6.5 catches up. The other advantages of 6.5 all come into play regardless of the range, which is why I consider it the winner. I think that it has made 308 not obsolete in the sense that it isn't any good, but now the argument is going to be, well, why would I use 308 instead of 6.5? And there are reasons to use it, as we discussed. But it isn't a default choice. It isn't going to be the, well, why would I not use 308? I think that's going to go away and be switched over the next few years. For new buyers, if you got a bunch of 308 and you've got a 308 rifle, I don't think there's any reason to switch. I mean, I did it, but I did it knowing I was doing it just because I wanted to. It had no practical purpose. So, that is it. Thank you for watching. Take care, have fun, stay safe, and good hunting, folks. Hunting season opened today for firearms in Connecticut. At least shotgun rifle on private land or on public land. I know owner private land has already been going for a little while, and I'm honestly not sure what the black powder rules are for Connecticut for deer season. But anyway, stay safe out there. Good hunting. Have fun. Say hi. Oof. Oof. Oof.